Okay, so you got a bench top, now you need a chassis to go under it. Let's build it. Then maybe we'll talk about selling you some undercoating, eh? Welcome to the Renaissance Woodworker, episode number 33. We're going to start on the legs and the stretchers of our Roubo bench. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Renaissance Woodworker. I'm your host Shannon Rogers, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the intro this week because I got quite a bit of footage in putting together the legs and the stretchers on the Roubo bench. So hope you guys are enjoying the trip so far. I am certainly having a lot of fun building this bench. So without further ado, let's jump on down to the shop and get busy on these legs. I actually have a variety of stock for my legs. Some of it is in its rough dimension, almost 2.5 inches thick, and others is just typical 8/4, just right at 2 inches. But all of it is 7 to 8 inches wide. So I needed to rip them in their rough form to under 6 inches so I can joint them on my jointer. This particular piece here and the next one you'll see are actually almost 2.5 inches thick. So I will actually be resawing these as well. And eventually I'll be creating 4 blanks per leg. Each blank will be will be 1.25 inches thick, and I'll laminate those 4 blanks together into 5-inch square legs. Rather than boring you with all that footage, from here it's jointing and thicknessing, and then I glued up 2 of the pieces together to form the center of the leg, which will eventually be the tenon for the leg. So once we get these cut and all the dressing, we'll move over to the actual final glue up of the legs.
Time to glue together the laminations for our legs. You can see that I've already tacked 2 2-inch wide spacers. These are just brad nailed into place on the end of the central tenon. If you remember correctly, I've already glued this central piece together, and I've gone ahead and flushed all the sides and gotten it squared and everything. So this is kind of the registering surface for the legs. These spacers in place will allow us to butt these side pieces up and perfectly square up the tenon shoulders, and we're not cutting a tenon later. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and separate this out and start applying the glue. Again, I'll be using this little roller, and make sure you keep your glue bottle always topped up because it makes things a lot easier. And I'm very, very liberal with the amount of glue that I'm putting on here. I may even put a little bit more on after I've rolled it out. I definitely want a solid glue bond. I want solid squeeze out all the way around the leg so that these monstrous legs really will be taking a great deal of weight. I want them to be very, very sturdy. When you put one of these fresh rollers on too, they tend to soak up a lot of glue right off the bat, so I'm going to have to go back and touch up a few spots where the roller sucked up more than was able to be put down on the wood. And I'm not worried about getting glue into these spacers because once I get the clamps on and everything firm, I'll go back and knock them off with a hammer. So I haven't done anything like waxing these spacers or anything like that. I just don't think it's necessary because I'll be knocking them off long before the glue even sets up. Yeah, see, this is rolling a lot better because the roller is not so dry like it was when I started on that other plank. Now I've got a kind of an error that I'm trying to correct at the same time here. When I was cutting these boards to rough length, somehow I think it was probably some sawdust on my my table saw, and there was a lot of sawdust, but I got the edges kind of, as I was cutting these edges, they went slightly out of square. So as I butt And believe me, when I tacked these on, I was using a square, making sure that these are perfectly square to this long edge. But when I butt the pieces firm up against the spacer, I'm getting a little deviation. This is shifting, this board is shifting kind of off this way. So I've got a little ledge here. It's flush up top here, but I've got a little edge down there. So what I want to do is make sure that this face is registered and get it as close as possible. I have built-in extra length in these to allow me to flush them later, but the most important part here is not getting this leg perfectly flush, but getting this shoulder to register perfectly square. And then I'll flip that over, and again make sure that stayed butted up against it. Okay, now we'll go ahead and do the other side. It's almost a shame. This leg's got some really cool kind of rippled figure in it. It's going to be hidden inside the leg, but if you remember correctly, when I was selecting the pieces and going through the rough lumber, determining what was going to be part of what, I had one board that had really kind of ripply, crazy grain to it, and that's what I delegated to go onto the legs, so I don't want that kind of crazy grain in my top, because it'll just make things too difficult to plane it flat over the years. Yeah, this is rolling out much nicer now. I think this little sponge roller is already saturated with glue. It's not sucking up so much anymore. So this will go on a lot faster than the last one. And again, just squeeze it up there in the gap. Make sure you get it all the way up in there. Roll this last one out. Unfortunately, I haven't really found a way to prime these rollers yet. I suppose I could keep them in a Ziploc bag or something like that, try to keep them from curing, but frankly, it's not that much of an inconvenience. Alright. Also notice that I did mark a cabinet maker's triangle on one of these faces, and just make sure you continue to register against that face. This one actually lines up a lot better than the others. I think this is after I realized I was getting slightly out of square, and I cleaned the table off. Okay, so now let's get this thing clamped up. I found that clamping them just where they sit in this orientation is a lot easier than trying to flip them up on its edge or things like that. This way I can monitor how tight they're registering up against those blocks, and I did get a little bit of a shift there, so the hammer, flush it up. Good. Just a little bit snug there. Don't want to quite crank down on it just yet. With a lot of glue in there, they tend to be a little bit slippery. So I don't want them to slide around on me while I'm clamping. These jet clamps, I think, are truly the wonders of the clamping world. I've used Bessie's. I even have some of those new, well, not new, but I have some of those Peachtree knockoffs. And You know, they all work great. It's just there's some little kind of creature comfort features on these jet clamps that just make them absolutely wonderful. I love the size of the jaw, the clamping surface. I just like how the handles, I like the way they operate, the kind of hexagonal shape of the handles. Allows you to twist them really, really nicely. You can really clamp down on them. I love the dog hole spots on the bottom. Allow you to register it on a bench for like clamping up a door or something. The mechanism for sliding them works really, really smoothly. And frankly, the glue doesn't stick to the jaws either, which is kind of nice. So there's my little impromptu review as I bear down on these clamps. What I'm going to do, let's get the camera here. So I want to check along those surfaces. I'm looking for an even amount of squeeze out on all those edges. And got good squeeze out all the way around. So now, this is clamped up. Let's go ahead and knock these spacers out of the way. That way those won't get glued in place. There is a little bit of squeeze out on there, but I can clean that up with a shoulder plane later. And what I find is that shoulder perfectly square. Good. Good. Nice and square. And of course it's square to the top. And square that way. Figured since I just clamped up one of these and I was extolling the virtues of the jet clamp, I figured I would give it a little bit of due camera time and show you these new P3 Parallel Pro clamps and give you my impressions there. They do serve their purpose quite well. They clamp very strongly, they clamp parallel. I do really like this kind of rubbery jaw. It grips the work quite nicely. Just making sure these are square to the spacers. Detractors, well, let me say, not so much detractors, but it uses the typical little plate mechanism. It works fine. You will need to spend a little bit of effort in waxing the bars to make sure that they don't get glue on them, because these tend to really gum up when that happens, like in this case. I have a little jam here, so they're not as smooth as the jets in that instance. And in fact, I think in this case I did get a little bit of glue on the clamp itself. So, yeah, it's a little bit rough in that respect. But for the most part, they do their job. And as soon as I get a few more of these in place and get it nice and stable, I'll show you one of the features that I really like about them. I was talking about the handles on the jet clamps and how much I liked the way they operated. There's one interesting thing about these Parallel Pros. When you're really starting to crank down on your workpiece and you need just that kind of little bit of extra oomph to clamp it in, here's a neat little trick that you can do with these. Just pull up on the handle and it rotates out to the side like that. It gives you that little bit of extra leverage. Now at the same time, I caution you to be careful. That extra leverage can be enough to actually break the clamp if you push too hard. So really it should just be used for kind of like maybe half a turn to snug them up. And you know, as I said, they lack a few of the creature comforts of the jet clamps, but they do the job and they clamp up really, really nicely. They keep it parallel. And what more can you ask for, really? The jet I like just because it's got a few extra bells and whistles, but for the price, I think I got all 4 of these clamps for about the same price of maybe 2 of the jet clamps. So there you go. Flip this around because the grain is rising this way. Scraper, it doesn't really matter. What I'm dealing with here is the boards went slightly out of alignment when gluing up, and I discovered that this product, basically these boards weren't completely straight along their edges. So in order to get the tenon perfectly square, get that shoulder perfectly square, these didn't line up entirely along their length. So up top near the tenon, the center tenon is actually a little bit higher than the 2 sides. And as it works its way down to the end, it reverses, so the 2 sides are slightly higher than the tenon. And certainly I could, you know, flatten that out on the joiner, but it's a little complex, seeing as it's kind of twisted throughout, and it's just easier for me to kind of locally attack it with a jack plane to bring each individual area down. So this is a little proud here. I'm going to go ahead and plane this down and then work it all the way across the length so that it's completely flat. And the great part is, with the glue lines showing the way they are, you can tell when it's perfectly flush because there's little bits of glue trapped in these areas, and when it's perfectly flush, that glue basically gets planed away. So now this is perfectly flush back to here where you see the glue line showing up again. So this allows me to work the entire length of the board and work until basically the glue has disappeared. We're actually almost there. Okay, that's completely flush across that end. Now we'll need to work this other side. So starting here where this part is slightly higher, my jack plane is set on a slightly higher angle too. This is it's one of these Lee Valley bevel ups, and I've got the iron is at 38 degrees, so it's producing a higher, well, a York pitch basically. So I'm getting a really smooth cut here, even though I don't really need that smoothing plane effect. Okay. Okay, that's flush there. Now take this part down. Oops, clogged, that's why. It's not the best planing angle I'm dealing with here. And with the other side of the board not being flat yet, this rocking is not helping. There we go. Okay, just a little bit more right here. Alright, now probably not necessary, but just for good measure. Let's take a run with the joiner plane. And you can hear there's a little bit of a valley right here in the center. And there we go. That side is perfectly flat. Register's nice and flat. Now I'll be able to run it through the planer from there. The last little test here is to see what our low spot is. Got 5 1/8, 5 1/4, a little more than 5 1/8. Okay, 5 1/16. Alright, good news is our absolute lowest point is right here. We planed it flat on one side, and this, from this width to this width, is about 5 1/16. I want them to be 5 inches square, which means I can now run this through the planer until this is perfectly flush, and then I'll be able to take one consistent pass all the way across to get it to exactly 5 inches square. And I believe we're a little proud of 5. Yeah, we are 5 2/16, 5 1/8 in this direction. So I'll be able to go ahead with that little bit of extra and get it perfectly square through the planer.
So back over to the thickness planer, and registering off that face we flattened by hand, I go ahead and I took a couple of passes to get it down to actually just over 5 inches along that length. And you know, I was able to. My shortest dimension, as I mentioned, was 5 1/8 of an inch, and I figured, you know, does it have to exactly be 5 inches? No, I got it perfectly flat at about 5 1/16. And this was actually my last pass here as I was checking the dimensions and saw that it was totally flat. So then, without switching the setting on the planer, I flipped the leg 90 degrees and I took the dimension down to the exact same dimension. I knew that I was within a 1/16 of an inch of that, so I could do it in one pass. And this way, since I haven't changed the setting on the planer, I've got an exactly square leg at about 5 1/16 of an inch. And from here, just repeat the process for the remaining 3 legs. Now, you'll notice that the bottoms of those legs are not flat, and that was by design so that I knew I could get that tenon perfectly set up when I was gluing them together. So here, I just took a piece of scrap, actually I think that's cypress, from my wood pile. I put a stop block in place. You can't see it right now, but it's actually double stick taped and actually clamped on the bottom of that fence. And I extended my saw blade up almost as far as it would go. It's not the maximum there. And registering with that stop block, I'm able to flip the piece over and then take the cut from both sides and get it pretty close. You know, it's not dead on accurate, and you'll probably be able to see the slight deviation in the thickness here once I make this second pass. As I pull the leg back from the second pass, you'll just be able to see a shadow line there where the blade didn't quite cut on the same level. But ideally, I got it to a total length of 30, I think I went with 31 inches total to the shoulder. So when you put the 4-inch bench on top, get 35 inches high. So from here, just using a flush trim bit, I went ahead and flushed up that section that the table saw didn't get perfectly flat. And just to be kind of perfectly anal about it, I went back over it with a block plane to ensure that it was perfectly flat on the bottom. I also used the block plane to cut a small, about 1/8 inch chamfer on all 4 legs of the bottom. In fact, I've already done it in this shot. Otherwise, if I didn't do the chamfer, I'd probably be getting some tear out on the legs here. But I went ahead and cut that chamfer by hand. And now I'm just checking with the straight edge to see whether or not I'm perfectly flat all the way across that bottom. It's not imperative that it be completely flat, because obviously there's going to be a lot of weight on this bench, but you know, while I'm at it, I might as well take the extra diligence to get a perfectly flat leg. And again, repeat that for all 4 legs, and we're good to go. So since I'm working on the legs, I decided I would go ahead and cut the stretchers. And here I'm cutting a bevel on the long stretchers. This is going to provide the bottom of the track that the sliding leg vise will ride on. And you know, simply put the table saw blade at a 45-degree bevel, and I'm cutting a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch chamfer here. So pretty straightforward setup. And once I make this pass, I'll go ahead and flip the board over and cut the other side of that chamfer. I decided with the stretchers that instead of going through kind of the extra trouble of gluing up the stretchers so that the tendons were already in place, that I wasn't going to worry about it on the stretchers. So the short stretchers I glued up as one solid block, and I'll go ahead and cut the tendons out on my bandsaw later. And in the instance of the stretchers, here you can see the chamfer. In the instance of the long stretcher, what I did is take the 3-inch wide piece, the narrower piece, and I went ahead and marked the 2.5 inch tendons on either end, so that when I glued them up, I made sure that I stayed inside the lines, and you can actually see the mark line there. And then it was just, you know, normal glue up, stuck them in the clamps, made sure I kept the bottoms flush so that they were in line with one another. And then once I had that all clamped up and the glue had set up and everything, it was just a matter of taking it from there over to the chop saw. I erased that original line I marked, and then I marked back from the shoulder 2.5 inches for the tenon length and chopped it off on the chop saw. Alright, and with that, pretty much completes the milling and the general glue ups and laminating for the Roubo bench. I now have the top's almost completely done. The extra laminates that I have to put on will go on after the in-vise is installed, but those laminates are already glued together and ready to be put into place. With the legs now glued together and assembled, the tendons ready to go, and the stretchers all together, really all that's left at this point is joinery. So in preparing for that, it's time to sharpen up some chisels. Next I'll be tackling the bench-crafted vise. So in parting, I want to throw out a little plug for my friends over at the Sawdust Chronicles, Eric Pearson and Rick Waters. They've got a pretty cool beginner woodworker contest going on over there. So head over to the sawdustchronicles.com, and over on the left-hand side you'll see the TSDC 30-day challenge, and click on those. There's an entry form there, there's instructions. This is a pretty cool idea. It's kind of project on demand. What Rick and Eric are doing, they're going to be getting people in on May 1st. They're going to be releasing a project that you have 30 days to build. And it's not a whatever you want to build. They're going to show us something, a piece by a woodworker, and we're supposed to build something that is inspired by that particular piece. And I do say we because I have entered in the contest. Technically it is for beginning woodworkers, and technically I still consider myself to be a beginning woodworker. Whether I pass muster as a beginner or not, I'm just excited about this kind of challenge to take something I haven't thought about before and coming up with my own design inspiration and building it in 30 days. They have some, from what I understand, some pretty cool prizes. They're sponsored by Rockler, Craig Machinery, General Finishes, and Woodcraft, I believe. So some pretty big name sponsors, and I think Rick told me that they've got about 17 or 18 entrants right now. Really want to get it up over 30. So guys, get over there. Get over to the website, sign up. It should be a lot of fun. You can continue to hear some updates from me in the future. So until next week, thanks for coming by.